Something that was very popular with the Switch 1, the entire generation just about, was the ability to customize the system almost completely, but definitely with the Joy-Cons in mind. I mean, we had different shell swaps happening, buttons all over the place. It was interesting just to see what combinations people would come up with, and especially as the generation went along and as more and more things were happening, it was pretty cool. Well, the Switch 2 just came out in June, so I wasn't even necessarily expecting much to really be happening early on. However, at Too Many Games, I ran across a certain booth that was showing off some different buttons that I actually think makes sense for the Switch 2. It definitely makes it look a bit more colorful, but that I did want to check out because I thought it'd be fun to take apart the Joy-Con 2 controllers here, see how the install is, and naturally see internals of the Switch 2 Joy-Con. So let's see how receptive these controllers are to being taken apart and having some of these mods applied. So if you guys enjoy these videos, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe if you're new. Okay, so just to be clear, this video isn't sponsored or anything. The background for this whole ordeal is literally me walking by their booth at Too Many Games and thinking it was interesting to see the Switch 2 custom buttons already being introduced into the market, and I figured it would provide a nice wrinkle to the JoyCon Disassembly and how exactly it all goes together when I make that video in the future. At the time, it was 3 or 4 weeks after launch, and I thought the setup of having the main face buttons match either the orange or blue accents looked pretty good. They did send over some of their buttons as well as these skins that I'll get to later in the video since you can see I already have one on this Joy-Con. Here's the site right on the front of their button set case. It's switchbuttons.com. From what I've seen, it's a smaller startup that also did some work with the Steam Deck, making buttons and other custom pieces. Here I have enough buttons for 2 sets of Switch 2 Joy-Cons, with the other pair being what looks like their party black set. I'll stick to the orange and blue buttons for now and might check out the other set down the road. Anyway, on to the Switch 2 JoyCon Disassembly, which Nintendo did a better job this time around trying to hide screws from plain view with the Joy-Con. There's a plastic cover around the outer edge that covers up 2 screws, and of course, one of them has to be a tri-wing screw. The opposite side has, go figure, 2 more tri-wing screws that are covered up when the Joy-Con, they're attached to the main system. With those all removed, the back unclips with a little help from a spudger, and the first thing that immediately falls out here is the button that releases the Joy-Con from the magnets. It just sort of floats around inside with this small metal bar, letting it move on a hinge. The rumble motor is attached at the bottom, and after carefully rocking it back and forth, it came unplugged, but be careful with this one. It really didn't want to let go, and I could see some ripped wires in the future for someone who's maybe less patient than I was here. All right, battery comes unplugged. Several screws later, I had some movement on the large plastic holder here. It wasn't until I realized that there was a screw hiding under ZR, that button there, that it all came free from the Joy-Con. I probably could have pulled off the ZR button completely and make it easier to get to, but I was able to just use a thinner Phillips head driver to get to it without much issue, and hey, the less I have to take apart here from the inside, the better. Once lifted up, it was just a matter of unclipping some ribbon cables for the ZR button, optical sensor, joystick, and charging rails. If your controller starts to drift and you want to replace the sticks, they are modular, so it's not a difficult fix, but you have to disassemble the Joy-Con down to this point. There, you just take out 2 screws, you unclip the ribbon cable, and drop the new one in. We have more screws all around the board. These need to be removed, and finally, we can get to the buttons. It's pretty standard stuff from here. Remove the rubber membranes and start to line up your replacement buttons. Also, here's a good comparison to the railing so you can see how the shade of the button looks when it's right next to it. I do like that the back of each button has the symbol and orientation so you know it's in the right spot without having to flip the shell over and double check, and you would constantly be doing that after you dropped each one in just to make sure it all lined up. Even the little plus and minus buttons have an up arrow, so that's a nice touch. Oh, and if you haven't noticed yet, your Switch 2 Joy-Con buttons don't really move around much if you were to, say, shake the controller, and that's because Nintendo actually thought to add little bits of adhesive to the rubber membrane. It's a good way to make the controller feel a bit more premium and eliminate a source of rattle. With all the buttons replaced, it's just a matter of putting things back together, which is usually the hard part, let's face it. The most annoying aspect for me during reassembly was definitely a few of these ribbon cables, since they end up being at some weird angles. You're going to need to be extra patient here, since a couple of these cables also have right angle turns, and those are typically most likely to rip with too much pulling. The rest of the way was fine once I got everything plugged in, and I only finished with 2 screws left over. So not bad for the first attempt, but also don't be lazy like me and make sure to take a bunch of pictures during disassembly so you know how to put it back together. I did a better job with the second Joy-Con since I was more familiar with it now, and this time I had no screws left over, so hey, good stuff. Oh, and now that we're done with the button installation, let me quickly explain what the deal is with the design on this controller. A couple of the guys from Too Many Games at their booth sent me home with a few of these Joy-Con skins, and I think they do a pretty good job solving an issue I have with the current controller, that there's really no texture to them. I mean, it's just smooth all the way around, including the back where you'll be gripping the entire system. I dropped a skin on the front and back, but really the back cover is all I would need since it adds textures to the surface, making it easier to grip. For example, dropping this skin on the back here keeps the front the same, very stock looking, but adds this really small set of dots, basically that sit where your hands make contact. It's a simple idea since it's just a console skin, but I think the feel is quite a bit better this way, and I've been using it like this for a few weeks now without any issue. Anyway, here's the final result with the orange and blue buttons swapped in. I get that Nintendo wanted to keep the system a bit more muted this time around since it's being geared towards a more mature audience, and I mean, the price point alone spells that out without the styling even being mentioned. Still, I like the idea of having a bit more of that orange and blue in the styling around the controller, and the buttons seem like the obvious starting point, at least until we end up with full-on Joy-Con shell swaps of any color we want. The buttons here, they all fit perfectly without any weird sticking issues that you can run into from fitment problems. On the site, it's mentioned that these are hand-cast resin buttons and not mass-produced. You can certainly see that in these fine details around the symbols on each of the buttons looking really clean. I did notice that these protrude less from the Switch 2 Joy-Con than the stock buttons. These still press and click fine. I didn't have any issues there. It was more of a feel thing that I noticed when using them. Otherwise, they look nearly stock, almost like it came from Nintendo with a new Switch 2 console edition. As for the installation process itself, I think it's a little easier than the Switch 1 Joy-Con. To me, it comes down to how much room you have to work with, and since the Switch 2 Joy-Cons are just larger, it's a bit easier to fold and place cables with more margin of error when it's time to clip the shells together at the end. It's not an easy process by any means, and could become an afternoon project, say, if you're taking your time, but I didn't find it as aggravating as the first Joy-Con when we were taking those apart back in 2017. It's just, you were stacking a lot more in a smaller area. Anyway, if you liked what you saw here with the buttons or the skins, I'll have that link down below for Switch Buttons website. Let me know what you think about the Switch 2 JoyCon Disassembly or the custom buttons that we're already seeing show up on the market. Oh, and what color scheme would you want to install if you had the choice of just any colors, anything? How would you outfit your Switch here? Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.